Good afternoon, everyone. You're listening to the Cam Vets Radio Report on WVOX AM 1460 and heard around the world on WVOX.com. This is Jack McGuirk of Ken Kraser bringing you this half-hour discussion of issues related to veterans and the active military. Now, here's Ken.
Hey, thanks, Jack. Good afternoon, everyone listening on this beautiful winter day in New Rochelle. One story has really dominated the news, this spy balloon that the Chinese flew from the Aleutian Islands across Canada into Montana, flew over essentially an ICBM base, one of the most secure areas for the U.S. military, then flew across the southeast and was taken down off of the South Carolina Myrtle Beach coast. My question is, what were the Chinese thinking?
Yeah.
Jack, I know you got a lot on that and other things. We're going to have to talk about it. An expert, Colonel Sam Houston, is a regular guest of ours, a graduate of West Point, and also 28 years service in the U.S. Army, garrison commander at the air base in Bagram, Afghanistan. He'll have a lot to say. I guarantee you, he'll have a lot to say on this one. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll start off with this Chinese spy balloon. U.S. military officials said that the balloon entered the U.S. air defense zone north of the Aleutian Islands on January 28th, which is, of course, off Alaska, and moved largely overland across Alaska, then into Canadian airspace in the Northwest Territories on last Monday, and crossed back into U.S. territory over northern Idaho Tuesday. And then last Thursday, it was spotted over Montana, which caused some concerns because that's home to one of America's 3 nuclear missile silos fields at Malmstrom Air Force Base. Americans were able to collect intelligence on the balloon as it flew over the U.S., giving them a number of days to analyze it and learn how it moved and what it was capable of surveilling, senior defense officials said. The Chinese continued to claim that the balloon was merely a weather research airship that had been blown off course, but the Pentagon rejected that out of hand, as well as China's contention that it was not being used for surveillance and had only limited navigational ability. But public disclosure of the balloon prompted the cancellation of a visit by U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to Beijing for talks aimed at reducing U.S.-China tensions. They canceled that trip. And the balloon, as you mentioned, it was traveled across the United States and ended up being shot down by an F-22 fighter jet off the coast, about 6 miles off the coast of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, in the Atlantic Ocean. It actually went down in 47 feet of water, which is a little bit shallower than expected, with a debris field of about 7 miles. This is a big balloon, by the way. It's about the size of 3 school buses.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure if that was sort of the size of the balloon itself or the devices that it was carrying, because it was seen to have solar panels for power. It wasn't shown, but I didn't really see any detail on what this balloon may have looked like. But one of the things they were saying is that it may have been able to pick up cell phone messages from being stationary about 60,000 feet in the air, that they wouldn't be able to pick up from satellites. And of course, satellites from the United States and China fly over each other's country every day, taking pictures. But this one certainly, when it was spotted by civilians in Montana and a news agency there, became a national and international story.
Indeed, and a trio of Navy warships, service divers, and the FBI are on the hunt for the wreckage off the coast of South Carolina. As I said, an F-22 Raptor took out this balloon. The Raptor was flying at about 58,000 feet. The balloon was at an altitude about 60,000 feet, which is higher than the commercial airline planes fly.
Oh yeah, commercial airliners are flying less than 40,000 feet. With the exceptions of like the Concorde, maybe even a little higher. That's interesting that the F-22 could get to 58,000 feet.
Wow. Yeah, you learn interesting things.
The surveillance balloon was spread over a 7-mile debris field in shallow water, 47 feet of water, as I mentioned. And a senior military official told reporters that the guided missile destroyer USS Oscar Austin, guided missile cruiser USS Philippine Sea, and amphibious warship USS Carter Hall are on station near the crash site. Also, Coast Guard cutters and boats are also on the scene to assist in the recovery. And Navy divers are currently embarked aboard the warships off the coast, Navy official confirmed. So you have the U.S. Navy, the Coast Guard, and the FBI all converging on this site to get the
Philippine Sea, Oscar Austin ships that have been guests at New York City Fleet Week over the years, while out of Norfolk Naval Base.
In the end, they're all converging on the spot. Navy divers also are going to try to recover that wreckage. And this comes as there was a second Chinese balloon that was spotted over Latin America, flying over Colombia. So, what is going on with these Chinese surveillance balloons? It's a crazy story, Ken.
Well, to do it right before you've got a very high-profile visit by the American Secretary of State, and from many reports, the Chinese were looking at those that needing to improve U.S.-China relations on a number of elements. So for them to pull a stunt like this just before an event of a major diplomatic meeting is kind of mind-boggling. It's sort of like maybe one side of the Chinese government didn't tell the other side of the Chinese government what was going on.
They weren't coordinated.
And maybe this was kind of an independent action by one area, within their intelligence community. But there's a lot of interesting questions in that. But it is concerning to have U.S. airspace compromised without announcement. I mean, Chinese airplanes fly, commercial airlines fly into the United States every day. But to have an unannounced balloon that's doing some kind of investigative work without announcement is, you take it for granted. You assume that's a military maneuver being done. And that's where the real problem was. The Chinese didn't announce this.
Mm-hmm. And sticking with the Chinese for a second, CIA Director William Burns has revealed that Chinese President Xi Jinping has instructed his country's army to be ready for 2027 to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan. Now, Burns made those remarks last week during an event at Georgetown University, where he also said he believes that Xi has been closely watching Russian President Vladimir Putin's prolonged and costly invasion of Ukraine. Beijing has been engaged in a tense territorial dispute with Taiwan, as we know. But Burns said that his assessment at CIA is that he wouldn't underestimate President Xi's ambitions with regards to Taiwan, and saying he's been pretty clear about that over the years. But thinks that he has watched very carefully what's happening in Ukraine with Russia, who, the Russians thought it would be, Putin thought it would be an easy invasion of Ukraine that would be over in a couple of weeks, but it's been almost a year now, so that has been a disaster for Russia. Burns went on to say that he doesn't mean that Xi's decided to conduct an invasion in 2027 or any other year, but a reminder of the seriousness of his focus on his ambition. Now, his comments come as more than a dozen Chinese military aircraft and 4 naval vessels were detected around Taiwan last Friday morning. So that's a scary thought there from the director of the CIA.
Yeah, well, it seems like that's China's ambition, this President Xi, to eventually, and maybe sooner than later, try to invade Taiwan, which they consider to be a breakaway republic. But the U.S. military people say they want Taiwan to be defended as prickly as possible, as thorny, like a porcupine, to make it as painful as possible for China to even consider invading. And then you got the U.S. Navy. But that's going to be quite a confrontation should China decide to invade Taiwan. That, it's one of those developments that could really be a big negative as far as the world international scene.
Indeed. And going back to what's happening in Ukraine, Ukraine will hold on to fiercely contested the eastern city of Bakhmut as long as it can, according to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said that last week on Friday. France and Italy will send long-range air defense systems to Ukraine in the spring. The country's defense minister said the system can target drones, missiles, and fighter jets. We've talked about the high mobility rocket systems that the U.S. has sent over to Ukraine, and also the Patriot missile system, which will be heading over there in the coming months. But now France and Italy sending long-range air defense systems to Ukraine to help them out. And also, we talked about the tanks that are heading over there from Germany, United States, and other countries. And now the Germans have another story from Germany that 88 Leopard 1 tanks from Germany are going to be heading over to Ukraine. The previous ones we talked about were Leopard 2 tanks. Now the Leopard 1 tanks are older tanks and are no longer produced and have shells that have a different caliber than the ones of the new Leopard 2 tanks. The German government is also considering buying back 15 Gepard tanks that it sold to Qatar. But it also might face some issues there because the ammunition for those is made in Switzerland, which has so far refused to approve re-exports to Ukraine on the grounds that it would breach its neutrality.
Oh.
However, some Swiss lawmakers are pushing for the country to reconsider its position, which would be quite stunning. A history of neutrality from Switzerland, but now we have some lawmakers changing their mind on that possibly.
Well, the concern is that Russia may decide to do an offensive in the near term. They've conscripted as much as 1 million soldiers from the public. The question is there any level of training, what the level of equipping, and what they'll do if faced with being in a battle. But those tanks might be able to get to Ukraine sooner. The question is if the Russians try something in the next month or so, or 6 weeks, will any of those tanks get there? But again, it's a very difficult spot in the world, a major conflict point, and we hope for the best, but it does not look good for avoiding a major conflict there this spring.
Indeed, and the USS Neats stopped on the edge of the Bosphorus Strait on its way to make a port call in Turkey, which makes it's the closest U.S. warship has been to the Ukraine-Russian war since it started nearly a year ago. It's part of the U.S. 6th Fleet, which is in the area, and I'm sure the U.S. Navy is keeping a close eye on Ukraine over there. You were listening to the Canvas Radio Report on WVOX AM 1460, heard around the world on WVOX.com. We'll be right back after this brief Fox News break, so stay tuned.